So, um, first episode today of the brand new podcast from TOB Football Outside the Box. So, might not be the most incredible one. It's the first one. I've not been podcasting for a couple of months now. I'm not used to the whole Zoom thing. But we do have a guest today. We're going to be having guests every single week on this podcast. I wouldn't be very good by myself, just sitting here talking. So today's guest, we do have David Astill, who is with us today on Zoom. So he writes about football analytics, other sports as well. So he's into a lot of that side of the game rather than just, some of the more kind of simplified reports that you might see online. He's actually into the whole tactics and analysis side of it. So he writes for Total Football Analysis. Recently has become the site lead for Total Rugby Analysis as well. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, George.
No problem. Have you got anything more you kind of like to explain about your kind of current positions and kind of like what led you to actually start kind of in the world of football analytics?
Yeah, so I've sort of always been interested in football, well, sport for that matter, analysis. So I've always felt that, when you're watching a football game or a rugby match or a Formula One race or whatever, and you've always got, I feel there's two types of people. So you've got the one person who will watch it and just watch it, and they'll say, goal, celebration, goal, but they won't necessarily look at all the details in between. They'll just look at the goal and say, oh, that was a good goal. That was a bad goal.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other person who will look at the match and, like I do, and go, that was a good goal. Why was it a good goal? That was okay. There was a little bit of interplay there. Why was that able to happen? And that's what I've always found I'm interested in is the whys and the hows. So if you see you've got a goal, if you rewind a little bit, you can see perhaps that one player shifted slightly to one side, giving a little bit of a gap. Player ran through. There's your answer. That's how the goal was scored. And I've always found I've been interested in that. And it's the same in rugby. It's the same in Formula One, because even some of the boring races where you know who's going to win, I've always found that actually if you look further back on the grid, you've got sort of 9th, 10th, 11th. They might not be the top teams, but there's always some interesting battles going on between the cars. And again, I've always found that really interesting. As to how I got to where I am today, basically I got involved in student radio at my university, Nottingham Trent University. The station was called Fly FM. I got involved in the sport team. I became, in the final year, myself and a friend basically presented the Saturday sports show. We have a 4-hour Saturday sports show, which is effectively our version of sort of Gillette Soccer Saturday or Final Score, or depending on which channel you watch. So we go through the results and the goals as they come in. We go through the analysis of the goals. We occasionally did a bit of live commentary. Talked about other sports as well, rather than just football. So things like when the Six Nations is on, we always focused on that. And that sort of got me interested in broadcasting. I then did a master's in broadcast journalism, which is how I then sort of perfected the skills of writing and working on radio and TV. And then from there, it was actually through a conversation with someone I met. I did a couple of 2 weeks work experience at BBC Sport back in November last year, and I met someone who introduced me or gave me the contact details of the person who runs Ronnie Dog Media, which is the parent company of Total Football Analysis, Total Rugby Analysis, and is the company and the person that I work for. And that's really where I am today. Through a conversation with them, I've then risen through the ranks of Total Football Analysis, and I've now published, I think I counted about 20 articles now on one site and about 6 or 7 on the other, and that's about sort of one a week. Obviously Total Rugby Analysis just started up, so that will kick in as well. But that's really where I am today, and that's where I've got to, and why.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story, because I think it's interesting that you say that it's kind of always been something that you've noticed. So was it even from watching football and like rugby and stuff, even when you were like much younger, you were already kind of seeing these things? Or was it something that kind of, as you became less of a spectator, well, obviously it's still spectating, in the broader sense of the word, but less of a spectator and more of a kind of intensive watcher, you kind of start picking these up? Or is it literally since you were a child, you were kind of asking yourself these questions?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was since I was a child. I think I'd agree with you. It's more sort of since I started watching it more intensely. I think it's more sort of when I started watching things like Match of the Day, and you start initially, I sort of watched it and I thought, I used to sort of play like my Nintendo games whilst it was on. So whilst the football was on, I'd watch the football. Then while the analysis was on, I'd go to that
Yeah,
because
no, I
you're
know
not
about
necessarily
that.
that interested. Exactly.
Yeah. So
Um,
I used to do similar thing. Like I used to,
yeah,
I think when I was younger, I used to watch, because obviously it's on Match of the Days on quite late on a Saturday. I think I used to watch it on the Sunday morning when it was on kind of 7:45ish in the morning. I think it's
yeah,
still, it varies when it's on, but I used to get up for that, and then you don't end up watching the analysis at that
no,
age. But I
no,
think it's similar for me because I think as you get older and you kind of, if that interest in football becomes more than just watching Match of the Day, following a club that you support, and you become kind of like further involved in it. Like now, the analysis is like a big part of what I would watch Match of the Day for. What specifically? Well, I'd say it like this. Specifically, do you think there has been like a massive rise in the interest in football analytics and tactics and that kind of thing in broadcasting? So, I mean, I've noticed personally on TV that a lot more of the pundits are using statistics more. We're seeing YouTube channels like Football Daily, people like that. There's also Tifo Football as well. A number of different channels that I watch personally who will use expected goals, that kind of thing. Where do you think that's come from, this kind of rise in an interest in the analytics? Because it's always been there in a sense. Obviously, it's evolving all the time, but it's always been there in a sense. What do you think it is that's kind of catalyzed such a seemingly kind of rapid increase in the enjoyment of consuming tactics and analytics?
I think it is consumer driven. Um, so from conversations I've had with various journalists and various people involved in sports writing, um, particularly at the BBC when I was there, as I said, the thing that they said to me was that people are not to, going to football websites purely for blow by blow accounts of what had just happened in the match, because they've just seen the match. They know, they've seen from their own eyes what's just happened in the match. They don't need you to tell them. What they want you to do is to go one step further now. So they effectively, it's like you've seen the match, you've had your moment to cry, laugh, celebrate, whatever, depending on how your team did. And then sort of the day after, you want to go to an authority website and get the sort of analysis and find out why that moment happened, why the team won, why the team lost, what they did wrong, what they did right, things like that. So I think it is consumer driven, because without that thirst for kind of analysis, tactics that the viewer or the reader wants, you wouldn't be able to necessarily, because ultimately in the media you are serving the people, you're giving them what they want, and that's the clever balance between the viewer and the writer. Is the writer is giving the viewer what they want. So if the viewer wants analysis, you have to give them analysis. Otherwise, they're not going to stay reading your stuff, and they'll move off. Because if you think about it, there are hundreds of football websites, hundreds of rugby websites, and you're going to go to the one that you think is most interesting and that gives you what you want. So, if the viewer wants analysis, they'll go to an analysis website. Therefore, if you want to keep your viewers and keep your readers, you have to give them analysis. So I think that's really where it's come from. It's this kind of change in consumer need for analysis rather than just here's a match report. That's the reason, I think.
Yeah, I think generally, yeah. I think you're kind of, more about kind of how to write analytically, that kind of thing. I do bits of it whenever I've always been the one in the Kickback Football podcast, which is the one that I started over a year ago now. I've done over 20 episodes of those ones at uni. Those ones, I'm always the one who kind of brings the most statistics to the table, that kind of thing. It interests me to kind of like look into, you know, stuff like your shots inside the box. Looking at, I read a thing recently that said, you want to know if a team is scoring goals, you want to know how they get to those goals. who's assisting, not as simple as this, but to start with, who's assisting them, where does the play begin, and then also look at positioning, that kind of thing. Would you also say that obviously Football Manager has been, previously Championship Manager as well, has been a huge thing, which is very much focused on that kind of thing, looking at your analysis and everything. Obviously, to a much lesser degree, you've got stuff like FIFA Career Mode as well, where you kind of have to, in a sense, buy players for your team if you're doing the manager mode who kind of fit in the team correctly. I've had it before where I've bought players and they've not really worked, and you end up selling them. Do you think that kind of virtual world of analysis and that kind of thing, because Football Manager is a kind of quite a good representation of the real kind of processes that I think sporting directors, etc., go through. Do you think that's also contributed to the kind of interest in it? The fact that people are put in that hot seat of analysing a player, seeing, oh, this player is going to be good for this team, etc.
Yeah, I do. As you quite rightly say, when you are playing those games and you are trying to sign players for your club, your virtual club, that is, you are having to make decisions that ordinarily the real life sporting director, the real life director of football, whoever it is, transfer committee, depending on which club it is, will have to make. And they'll have to say, yes, that player, not that player. And ultimately, that's what you're doing. So I completely agree. When you're having to make those decisions, sometimes, or most of the time, you can then, see when it comes to the real life and your club, and you hear in the news saying your club has said no to that player and yes to that player, and supposedly we've made a bid, but actually no, we haven't. And you can actually understand when they say we didn't think he fit the club, we didn't think he fit the playing style of the team. You can say, I can understand that now because having done that virtually, I know what decisions they're having to make. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's a kind of thing where obviously there's a constant argument that Man United specifically need a sporting director or director of football. So they have, we think, Ed Woodward kind of in charge of a lot of the sort of transfer side of things. People say he's not a football person, he's a business person. There's obviously been a rise of the sporting director / director of football. We've seen people like Monchi doing it for years at Sevilla, went to Roma, not as much success, and now back at Sevilla. There's Mikhail Zorc at Dortmund. I think you've got Salihamidzic at Bayern Munich. Man City have a very good sporting director. Do you think that is the way forward? Because I know obviously I'm an Aston Villa supporter. We've recently got, well, not too recently now, Jesus Garcia Patak, who hasn't really done a brilliant job in terms of bringing in the right players for us, given our current predicament in the league. Do you think that is the way forward, that virtually every club is going to be looking at people like Ralf Rangnick at Leipzig and thinking, this is how this club has transformed? Obviously, they've got Red Bull money as well, but this is how this club has transformed from being a lower league team, buying young players with good potential, that kind of thing. Do you think that is the way forward generally across European football and beyond?
I think it depends what type of manager you want, because there are some managers who won't want to work under a sporting director and some that are quite happy to. So I think the way forward for clubs, if I'm being honest, is to look at the team, look at the manager and work out how they want to. Obviously, you reserve the right to sack the manager because you're the owner or you're the chairman or sporting director. But I think the way forward is, yes, perhaps more clubs are turning towards, and in fact they are. But I do think that also you have to look at the way that you want your team to be run. Do you want your manager to be able to bring in his own players? Because the thing that we are hearing about those who are working under a director of football is that there are stories coming about I didn't want that player. I think Maurizio Pochettino was a key one. I think he said once, I can't remember which player it was, I wouldn't have signed that player, but unfortunately, the higher levels wanted him, so I had to bring him in. And that's the thing, is do you want your manager to have those decisions and have the power to make those decisions, or do you want your head coach, as it is, to simply be brought in and tasked with running the team, whatever team that is and whatever players that is? That's the balance, really. And you'll see some clubs get it absolutely right, and the head coaches are perfect and they work well with the players, and some managers just don't work with the players and prefer to have control. So that's the balance, really, I think. Yeah.
I think, yeah, that does seem to be the kind of balance. You have either a manager who is in charge of obviously the tactics, the training, everything like that, and has a big say on transfers, or you're having a head coach who is basically just involved with the training of the team and the running of the team, and then you have the sporting director, and they might communicate with each other on transfers, that kind of thing. I think the setup's very different. Seems to be very different at most clubs, and as an outsider, there's not necessarily an easy way of knowing necessarily exactly how that club is being run. Like, I don't know, for example, how much of a say Dean Smith had on signings at Villa last summer when he brought in players like Wesley and Douglas Luiz, players who didn't really have any proper experience of playing in England, and were probably overpriced. Even Tyrone Mings, I feel, was a little bit overpriced. But it works. I suppose it works in varying degrees with different clubs, that kind of thing as well. Another thing I'd also say, so we look at, I'm not sure how old exactly are you?
23.
Same as me.
Yeah.
So we kind of grew up during the same kind of era of football. Like, I got into football kind of round about the Invincibles era, I think, of Arsenal, sort of 03, 04 towards the tail end. I think it was really Arsenal who got me into football. I kind of followed Arsenal mainly because I love Thierry Henry, and then quickly became a Villa fan because on my dad's side of the family are all Villa supporters. But yeah, I think back in those days, I've kind of forgotten where I was going with that. I was going to say, like, 4-4-2 was obviously prevalent in the Premier League. It was that kind of philosophy of, four at the back, four across the middle, two central midfielders, two wingers, two strikers. And it was that system of kind of lump it up from the back towards the strikers. It's a bit of a cliche, but kind of for a reason, because there was a lot more of that. Obviously, you see some sort of traditionalist teams sort of sticking to that. But obviously, you've got a lot of 4-3-3 at the moment, a lot of 4-2-3-1 in the Premier League. And obviously, especially when Antonio Conte came to Chelsea, we saw kind of three at the back really kind of escalate. It's been a big thing in Italy for quite a long time, but for the first time it's sort of properly been seen. And that obviously worked amazingly with the wing backs for Chelsea. Do you think that's also something that's contributed to kind of like people being more interested in it? The fact that we do have such varying tactics. So you have, rather than a strike partnership, you might have a front three in, Salah, Firmino, and Mane at Liverpool. You have sort of different styles of play. If you have a number 10, not everyone's going to be the same number 10. Dele Alli, James Maddison, Jack Grealish, different players, but they all play round about the same sort of position in the park. Do you think the kind of fluidity of positions in football now do you think that's working in favour of tactics or against it? Do you think it's almost kind of like these tactics are something that you tell to the team, but you can't really put them into words or into a specific formation? Because it does feel like some clubs are kind of playing less with a formation now, and they're kind of playing in their own general areas, but there's not really a fixed formation. How do you think that sort of serves the world of tactics? Do you think it's sort of going to become more difficult to track tactics and formations and stuff like that, or maybe easier?
It's a very good question. I think the simple answer is you just get to know what formations your team prefers. And your team's formation will be determined by the players they have at their disposal. So, for example, Liverpool love to play high wing backs, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Andy Robertson. We both know bomb up the pitch as high as they can get, which allows Salah and Mane as the two wider forwards to cut inside. That's the simple way that Liverpool play. You've got Southampton, who like to, again, when Ralph Hasenhüttl came in, you've got, he played Jan Valery at right back and Ryan Bertrand at left back, again, as wing backs. I think you just get to know how your team plays, and more particularly how your manager wants to play. And some fans will do it by looking at the manager's previous club and looking how they played. I think, from my personal experience, what I did for a long time was I always looked at the lineups before each match kicked off. So when they came out on I use BBC Sport because I got notifications on my phone. So they come out about an hour beforehand. So I always looked and I always worked out, who the wingers are, who the central midfielders are, the left back, right back, centre back. So you can work out very quickly what formation they're using. So Bournemouth, for example, very easy 4-4-2 because they always do that. So you can work out if you've got Fraser, Lerma, Billing, Ibe, for example, very quickly that's your four. And then I always found afterwards that I was always interested to go back to the lineups and see who'd been substituted. And for example, if you had Fraser's been taken off for Adam Smith, well, Adam Smith's a right back, so obviously that means that he's changed the formation slightly. He's gone perhaps 5 at the back, and he's always maybe gone Adam Smith as a right wing back. So I always found that fascinating. I think that's perhaps one way that fans get accustomed to it and perhaps get more interested in it. As you quite rightly say, they get interested in the way their teams are playing. You can see it on football highlights and YouTube and things. You can see how your team is lining up because you've got the great big camera views, so you can see very clearly there's a 5 in midfield, there's 3 at the back, there's 2. Well, there's your 3-5-2. So absolutely, I think formations absolutely is a big part of the rise in interest in tactics.
Yeah, I think that's a very solid point. I think because it is sometimes difficult. I know a lot of clubs do it, but specifically when Villa do it, they release when the actual social media team actually put the team out. They don't have it in a formation style. It's just the list of players. And there's always a discussion as to like what formation it is. Why is that player in there? That doesn't really seem to fit. Is he playing 5 at the back? Is he playing 4 at the back? And there's always a lot of criticism. And then you go into the game and it's completely different to what you thought. So I think it's definitely interesting the way that things are going with tactics, all that kind of thing. What do you kind of see as the future? Do you see kind of football clubs delving even further into the analytics? Obviously, we're seeing companies like Opta becoming, very well trusted in that kind of field, as a few other companies as well, who are kind of very trusted. And you're also seeing you're seeing certain teams kind of picking up almost unheard of players based on analysis. If you take, say, like N'Golo Kante when he joined Leicester from France, he was in Ligue 2. No, I think he was in Ligue 1. Like Mahrez was at Le Havre in Ligue 2. These players have never been heard of to Premier League supporters and stuff like that. I mean, when you see the success that brought to Leicester, you can also look at clubs like Huddersfield and Norwich, who both actually brought in managers from Borussia Dortmund's B team, and then they brought in a lot of kind of lesser known German talents, and they both managed to get promoted. Do you think then that is a direct result of not watching kind of football as a spectator and going, he's good, we'll try and sign him, but more a case of kind of looking specifically at where the gaps are in your team and searching for a player based on those gaps? I mean, we've seen guys like Buendia, who was hardly known about before he joined Norwich, and he's been a revelation, linked with a lot of big clubs. Norwich, I'd say, is a good example. But do you think, that's it for teams now? It's less he looks good, we'll sign him, as more kind of an intense search. Do you think that's about right?
I do. I mean, if you read when transfers, so when the reports of transfers are put up on various websites, you'll always hear, and I always find the most interesting thing is the manager's comments, and I always read them very carefully because they'll say something like, for example, we feel he can add something to what we already have, or we feel he'll give us I think one of my favourites was when Forest Green brought in Isaiah Osborne on a very short-term deal, but Mark Cooper, the Forest Green Rovers manager, said at the time, he gives us a bit of bite in front of the defence, which we think we're missing. So it's things like that, which obviously tell you that they're thinking carefully about this. Even the short-term deals, even the sort of 3-month deals, they're thinking carefully about who they bring in because they feel that they can add something to that particular area that they're missing. So absolutely, I agree. I think really they have to think about analytics and tactics when they sign players because, as you quite rightly say, they're not going to sign someone because they think he plays well. They're going to sign someone because they've seen what he adds to a player, to a team. And you hear about managers will go abroad, they'll watch matches, and they'll take notes on a particular player. And I think in that sense, they are really thinking, that player plays in that area. So, for example, he's a number 10. He plays in the hole behind the two strikers, let's say. And they're thinking, I could do one of those because we play 4-4-2, but I'd occasionally like to play 4-3-1-2, so that I've got a little bit more of a link between the midfield and my strikers, but I haven't got a player, or I haven't seen a player, and I haven't got one in my squad who can do that, but I've just seen one there. So let's make a move for him because I've just seen what he can do. So in that sense, yeah, they are looking at tactics. They are looking at how that player can fit into their team and therefore whether to make a bid for him or not. But as I say, the manager's comments are always really interesting because they give you an insight into why they've chosen that player. And sometimes it's really interesting because, you know, you there's a player that you haven't heard them linked before, but they've just gone for him, and you think, well, I've never heard of him, or I have heard of him, but I wouldn't have thought we'd sign him. But then when you look at the comments or you look at the way they play, and you think, actually, now I can see what the managers say. Now I can see what they're doing. Yeah, maybe he could add to the team. So yeah,
I think it's also a good way of kind of spending less money as well, because if you're looking kind of deeper, you will find these sort of hidden gems. You can find players that you can pick up for, less than £1 million, where before you would, I think like players like Mahrez and Kante actually are perfect examples at Leicester. They cost like next to nothing. And obviously it's good financially for the resale value that they managed to get out of those guys to Chelsea and Man City respectively. But also good for them because they're getting these players, they're building a squad, and they're not spending a fortune. Maybe they would have gone out and got a central defensive midfielder instead of Kante, who costs 10 to 15, 20 million, that kind of thing. It's obviously a difficult question as well because it's probably going to be one of the last questions, if not the. But obviously we've got quite a difficult time at the moment. Nobody's really entirely sure what the finances are going to be looking like in terms of football, what the transfer window is going to be like, when it's even going to be this year. But do you think football clubs, I think this is quite a good thing to end on, do you think football clubs will be looking directly to tactics, looking to analytics, looking to stats in order to find these hidden gems more so because they're going to be tight on the purse strings? And do you think that is going to be a good thing in terms of stopping the kind of overspending that has ramped up even more since the Neymar move?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, free transfers, you're going to find a lot of free transfers are made, particularly by the big clubs, because they simply can't afford to go out and get an £80 million player because they just haven't got the money. And, financially, we've seen how badly clubs can be hit. But absolutely, I think they're going to be under even more pressure to get the right player. They're not going to be able to go, because there's been no football. They haven't spent the last few months sending their scouts out to here, there, and everywhere to look at players. They're going to have literally, one or two options for a player. So what the player they really want and a backup option, and they're going to have really, really thought about those. Or I certainly hope they have anyway, because that's the only way I can see them making it a good transfer window. You look at Chelsea; they've already got 1 and 90% of a second in Hakim Ziyech coming in, the Moroccan from Ajax, and then you've got Timo Werner, who is supposedly very close.
I
So
think
they've obviously really, really thought. Yeah,
Chelsea could go absolutely mad next season. I think
absolutely.
their season's looking very bright next season. Obviously, Tammy Abraham kicked off well, but a few
Yeah,
injury problems. To have
yeah,
Werner in there, that's going to,
absolutely.
massively revamp. Obviously,
Yeah.
they've got their own players going on freeze as well. I think Willian's available, linked with Spurs. Pedro maybe as well.
Yes, I think he's on his way.
I think his contract might be up as well.
Yeah,
But yeah, guys like that. I know there's probably a few younger guys. I know there's Tongi Kouassi. He's like a teenage centre back at PSG. There's I think Ryan Fraser might be going. So
yeah.
there's a few. There's a few sort of gems to be keeping an eye out on.
Mm.
And I think that's going to become a focus probably for a lot of clubs. And I think another thing is the pre-contract agreement and everything like that. I think that might be something that kind of kicks off. Obviously, as you've said, we've seen Ziyech and potentially Werner. Looks like it's on the cards as well. Have you got any kind of like final statements, I suppose, on the world of kind of football analytics and what you think the future holds for kind of that field on the whole?
I can see it growing. From what I've seen, people are really, really interested in analysis, in tactics. I think that's only going to grow. particularly speaking from total football analysis point of view, we've seen our audience grow massively during coronavirus lockdown. So, you know, from that example alone, you can see how people genuinely are interested in tactics and how the audience is growing. And that, you know, nothing's going to get in the way of them getting a tactical fix. So in that sense, yeah, I can only see it getting bigger. As I say, I've spoken to journalists who think the same thing. It is, as I said, it is simply about people know what they've just seen. They don't need to know the what, where, when, because they've just seen it on the television or they've just been to the game. They know that player scored and they know that player assisted it. They know that player was in the midfield. They don't need you to tell them that because they know that. They want you to tell them what was that player doing there and why. Why did the manager put him there? You know, was he there? What was the job that he was given to do? Why was that player so far upfield if he's a left back assisting the goal? Why was that striker in the middle undefended? That's the job of the journalist or, you know, the sport writer to tell them that. And again, newspapers, you can get the report in newspaper. So why would you then go to a website to get the same thing? That's the thing, really.
I think that's a very good point to end on. So looks like the future is looking quite bright for the world of football analytics and statistics. Definitely a really interesting field to get into. Make sure that you check out David on Total Football Analysis and Total Rugby Analysis, obviously. When's that sort of kicking off? Is that something that's going to be happening soon, or?
It's I was appointed site lead last Friday, so I spent the weekend and today working on all the behind the scenes stuff. So we set up a Twitter account, which is at analysis_TR, all lowercase. There's at Total Analysis with the capital T, capital A. That's the Total Football Analysis and Total Rugby Analysis Twitter accounts. You can find all of our content on there, the links to it anyway. But yeah, I mean that the rugby thing is we're likely to be kicking that off. Well, we already have kicked it off, but the content is likely to be coming very soon. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, you can start finding stuff on there.
That's great. So yeah, just before we leave, at TOB_football is the Twitter account. We don't really have much on there currently. Not many followers because we've not really had any content yet. There is a blog coming as well, which is going to be alongside this Outside the Box podcast. The blog, I'm going to be looking for some writers for that. So do let me know if you're interested in that by maybe DMing the Twitter account, that kind of thing. And yeah, I think that's been a good first podcast for us. Thank you, David, for coming along. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, George. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. And thank you for listening. We'll see you again soon.